suppose I need to contact the admins. The administration was sure to be the most informed about this abnormal situation. The problem was how to reach them. Usually a shout or GM call would work, but if they didn't know now, a message maybe. There was one magic spell that was a way to contact people. It could only be used in specific places and situations, but it seemed effective now. The only problem was that it was usually used to communicate between players. He wasn't sure if it would work to contact a GM. He didn't even have a guarantee that magic in general would work normally in this crisis. But he had to find out. Momonga was a level 100 magic user. If he couldn't use magic, his area of operations and information gathering powers would be severely limited, not to mention his combat strength. Right now he had no idea what the situation was, so he needed to confirm as soon as possible whether or not he could use magic. In that case, I need to go somewhere I can test it out. He looked out over the throne room and shook his head. This was an emergency, but he didn't want to disturb the room's sublime tranquility for magic experiments. But then where could he go, he thought, and he came up with an ideal location. It was also necessary to test the extent of his influence. He had to see whether he had maintained his authority as guild master. So far, everyone he had met was loyal to him, but there were several NPCs in the Great Tomb of Nazarick at his level. He needed to make sure the rest of them were still loyal too. But he looked down at Sebas and the maids who were still on one knee, and then at Albedo beside him. What is it? Her faint smile seemed to say. She was beautiful, but the shadows cast by her horns made it seem like something was hidden behind her smile. It made Momonga nervous. Is the loyalty they have now inviolable and unchanging? In the real world, a boss who makes stupid moves all the time loses support. Does it work the same way here, or is it once faithful, always faithful? If their loyalty could change, how do I maintain it? By giving them rewards. The treasury contained vast riches. It would pain him to lay a hand on the items his former guildmates had left, but if it was to keep Aints Ulgaun going through this crisis, they would forgive him, wouldn't they? He didn't have any idea how much he should pay, or by displaying the excellence you'd expect of a ruler. What constituted excellence, however, was unclear. He had the feeling things would work out if he just kept maintaining the dungeon. Or maybe through power. The staff of Aints Ulgaun flew automatically into his outstretched hand. Overwhelming power. The staff's 7 jewels began to sparkle, as if appealing for their vast magical power to be used. Well, I guess I'll think about it later. He let go of the staff. It swayed in the air for a moment, and then clattered to the floor like someone going to bed in a huff. Anyhow, it seemed like if he acted like he was in charge, he was unlikely to meet hostility anytime soon. It's hard for animals to turn their fangs on one who doesn't show any weaknesses. The same thing went for humans. Momonga raised his voice. Pleiades, all of you except the one going with Sebas go up to the 9th level. Be on the lookout for any raiders coming down from 8. Yes, Lord Momonga. The maids behind Sebas complied. Now go immediately. Understood, Lord and Master, their voices echoed. Sebas and the combat maids all paid their respects to Momonga, stood at once, and set off. The huge door opened and then closed after them. I'm so glad they didn't say no or something. Relieved, he turned to the last remaining NPC. Albedo was still waiting beside him. Now then, Lord Momonga, what may I do for you? She asked with a gentle smile. Oh, all right. Momonga leaned out of the throne to pick up his staff. Come here. Yes, sir. She sounded overjoyed and sidled right up. Momonga worried about her wand and the black sphere floating on the end of it for just a moment, but decided to forget about it. She was closer than last time, all but clinging to him. She smells so good, but what am I thinking? The thought popped up again, but he promptly dismissed it. He didn't have time for that sort of nonsense now. Momonga reached out and touched her hand. NGH, The look on Albedo's face said she was in pain. He whipped his hand away as if he'd been electrocuted. I wonder what's wrong. Did I creep her out? Mixed with numerous sad memories, like having cashiers drop change into his hand from above to avoid accidentally touching him, he found the answer. An Overlord was a higher rank of Elder Lick. One special ability an Elder Lick could acquire by leveling up was dealing damage by touch normally as an attack. Maybe that's it, but even if that was the case, there were still questions remaining. In Yggdrasil, the system would judge mobs and NPCs within the Great Tomb of Nazarick as belonging to Aints Ulgaun. Friendly fire for guild members was always off, so allies couldn't harm one another. So did that mean she didn't belong to the guild, or that friendly fire had been turned on? Momonga decided the latter was a distinct possibility. He said to Albedo, "Sorry, I forgot to turn off negative touch." "Never you mind, Lord Momonga, that level of damage wasn't even damage. Besides, I would suffer any agony for you, eek." "Oh, I see, but I'm sorry," Momonga stammered. He didn't know how to act toward Albedo as she made that cute little shriek and covered her blushing cheeks with her hands. It did seem like the issue had been damage from negative touch. Averting his eyes from Albedo, who was going on about a virgin's pain, Momonga tried to think how to temporarily turn off a passive power. Suddenly, it dawned on him. Using any of an Overlord's various powers was now as natural an act as breathing. He found himself laughing in spite of himself at what an extraordinary situation he was in. After all the strange things that had happened so far, it didn't even surprise him. Adaptability is a terrifying thing. "I'm going to touch you." Oh, after turning off his ability, he reached out and touched her hand. Countless thoughts came up how delicate it was, how white, but Momonga dismissed any that stemmed from his being male. He wanted to know if she had a pulse. "She does." The beat was steady, bar bum, bar bum. It was natural for a living thing. Yeah, for a living thing. Momonga took his hand away and looked at his own wrist. There was no skin, flesh, or anything besides pure white bone. He had no blood vessels, so of course he had no pulse. That's right, an Overlord was undead, a being who had transcended death. He wouldn't have a pulse. He looked up at Albedo. He could see himself in her glistening pupils. Her cheeks were awfully flushed, her body temperature was probably skyrocketing. Noting these changes was enough to shake him up. "What's going on? This is an NPC, just some data, right?" What kind of AI can make data look like it's actually alive? It's practically as if Yggdrasil has become reality. That's impossible. Momonga shook his head. It can't be anything as crazy as that. But once the idea had lodged in his mind, it wouldn't come unstuck so easily. He felt vaguely uncomfortable about the changes he was noticing in Albedo. He hesitated about what to do next. His next move would be his last. If he checked this last thing, all of his hunches would turn to convictions. The balance that shows whether this is reality or not would swing one way or the other, so he had to do it. He wouldn't be surprised if she attacked him with the weapon she was holding, but even so, "Albedo, can I touch your chest?" "Huh." The atmosphere froze solid. Albedo blinked, bewildered. The moment he said it, Momonga felt he might die of embarrassment. Sure, he'd had no choice, but what kind of thing was that to say to a lady? He had the urge to howl that he was the worst person in existence. He had abused his power to sexually harass a woman. He really was the worst, but he couldn't help it. Yes, it had to be done. He forcefully talked himself down and quickly regained his mental equilibrium. Then he mustered all of his coercive power as a superior. "You don't meow, do you?" It was a failure. His timid words caused Albedo to beam as if she were the sun making all the flowers bloom. "Of course, Lord Momonga, please have your way with me." She puffed out her chest, and her substantial breasts were thrust into Momonga's face. If he had had the ability to gulp, he would have surely done so several times. Her breasts were giving her dress great lift, and he was about to touch them. On one hand, Momonga was feeling oddly nervous and shaken, but some corner of his brain was calmly and objectively self-observant. He started to feel stupid. Why did he think of this test, and why was he actually doing it? For some reason, when he peeked at Albedo, she stuck her chest out even more. It was as if to say, "Go ahead," and her eyes were twinkling. Was Momonga aroused or ashamed? He willed his hand to stop shaking, made up his mind, and reached out. Under the dress, he felt something a bit rigid, but beneath that, he could feel something soft. RNGH. Amid Albedo's moaning, Momonga got the information he was after. Assuming he was still sane, Momonga had two hypotheses for explaining the current situation. One was the possibility of a new DMMORPG. In other words, at the same time Yggdrasil had shut down, Yggdrasil II had started up. But that didn't seem terribly plausible after what he'd just experienced. In Yggdrasil, doing anything rated R was strictly forbidden. Even PG-13 could be considered out of line in some cases. Violators were dealt with severely, their names were posted to the list of abusers on the game's website, and their accounts were suspended. That's because if a log of it were made public, the operators could find themselves afoul of the adult entertainment business laws. Under normal circumstances, Momonga wouldn't have been surprised if what he'd just done had been against the rules. If he was still in a game world, there should have been some measure in place to prevent it. In the first place, if the game masters and administrators were monitoring, they would have tried to stop him, but there was no sign of that. Additionally, the cyber-tech laws that governed DMMORPGs viewed forcible non-consensual participation in a game as kidnapping for ransom. If someone were forced to be a test player, it would be immediately exposed. The inability to force quit would probably be seen as illegal confinement too. If that was what was going on, the game's proprietary console had to keep a week's worth of records by law, so exposing it would be easy enough. When he didn't show up for work, someone would probably come over to check on him. And once the police investigated the console, that would clear things up. But was there really a company stupid enough to commit a crime so easy to get caught for in an organization-wide way? Of course, if they said, it's an early demo version of Yggdrasil II, or we just released a patch, there was a gray zone. But he couldn't believe it would be worth the risk for the developers or admins, so something else had to be at work besides the developers' intentions. In that case, he needed to make a fundamental change in the way he was thinking. Otherwise, he wouldn't get anywhere. The problem was that he wasn't sure how he should think. There was one other possibility. Perhaps the fantasy world had become the real world. Impossible. He promptly rejected the idea. Something so outrageous, so illogical couldn't be true. On the other hand, the longer this went on, the more he wondered if it might actually be the case. He remembered the fragrance coming off Albedo earlier. The senses of taste and smell were altogether banned from fantasy worlds by cyber-tech laws. Yggdrasil had a system for eating and drinking, but anything players consumed only affected their in-game stats. Even touch was regulated to some extent. This was also the game wouldn't be mistaken for the real world. As a result of all the limitations, fantasy worlds featuring sex hadn't really caught on, but here he could smell. The reality of that hit Momonga so hard it completely blew away all his what about work tomorrow, and what if I can't get out of here type of worries. If this weren't reality just in terms of the bandwidth that would be required to run this fantasy, it'd be impossible. His mouth was bone dry, but he swallowed anyway. Even if he couldn't understand it, his mind had already accepted it. Finally, he let his hand fall limply from Albedo's full chest. He felt he'd been groping her a bit longer than necessary, but he told himself it was something he had to do for confirmation. It certainly wasn't, because she was so soft, he couldn't take his hand away at least, probably not. Sorry, Albedo. She exhaled hotly, and he could feel why her cheeks had turned so red. Then she said, looking slightly askance, so here it is, my first time. Momonga let out a confused yelp. It took him a moment to understand what she was saying. First time for what? And what's with that look on her face? What shall I do with my clothes? What? Would you like me to take them off myself? Or did you want to do it? If I keep them on, they might get dirty. Oh, but if my lord prefers it that way, I have no objections. Finally, her words sank in. Momonga wondered if he even had any brain left for them to sink into. Once he understood where all this was coming from, it grated on him. Stop. Stop it, Albedo. Yes, sir. Right now we can't, we don't have time to be doing such things. My humble apologies. I shouldn't have prioritized desire when we are having some sort of emergency. She jumped away from him, but Momonga put out a hand to stop her. You're fine. My fault. All is forgiven, Albedo. More importantly, I have orders for you. Anything you wish, my lord. Contact the floor guardians and tell them to gather at the amphitheatrum on the 6th level 1 hour from now. I will let Aura and Mer know myself, so there is no need to contact them. Understood. To repeat, you would like me to contact all the floor guardians besides those of the 6th level and tell them to meet in the 6th level's amphitheatrum 1 hour from now. Right. Now go. My lord. Albedo turned to leave the throne room with slightly quickened steps. Watching her go, Momonga heaved a tired sigh. Once she had left, he let out an agonized moan. What the hell? It was just a stupid joke. If I'd have known this would happen, I wouldn't have done it. Have I defiled the NPC that Tabula created? He could think of only one reason Albedo would react to him in that way, the text he'd edited into her bio, and she's in love with Momonga. It had to be connected to that. Ah, crap, he groaned. Tabula Smaragdina had put his all into filling that blank canvas with Albedo's backstory. Then Momonga condescendingly painted over it for his own selfish reasons, and now this was the result. He felt like he'd vandalized a masterpiece, but he had to put that issue aside for now. Still wincing though it wasn't obvious, given that his face was a skull, he stood up from the throne. He told himself he could figure that problem out after taking care of the more urgent tasks. Chapter 2, The Floor Guardians Return, Demons of Lemigeton. At Momonga's command, the Ultra-Rare Ore Golems returned to their seats. They resumed their postures of vigilance on lighter feet than one would expect for their builds. The first thing Momonga had done upon resigning himself to officially wondering whether his fantasy world had indeed become the real one was to guarantee his safety. The NPCs he had met a moment ago all submitted to him, but that didn't mean the ones he would meet next would. Even if they did prove to be allies, there was no telling what dangers might lie ahead. His survival could very well depend on whether the tomb's facilities, golems, items, magic, and everything else functioned as in the game. Confirming those things was his most urgent priority. That should be good for now, Momonga said to himself with relief as he surveyed the golems. He ordered them not to take commands from anyone else. So in the worst-case scenario of an NPC rebellion, he would at least have one way to protect himself. Satisfied with the robust figures of the Golians, he looked down at his own finger bones. There were 9 rings on his 10 fingers. The only one that didn't have a ring was his left ring finger. In Yggdrasil, it was normally only possible to wear 1 ring per hand, but by purchasing an expensive item with a permanent effect, Momonga had gained the ability to wear rings on all 10 fingers. He could also use all the powers they contained. It wasn't that this made him very special. If a player wanted to be strong, buying that item was a no-brainer. The ring Momonga was looking at now bore the same crest that was embroidered on the scarlet tapestry hanging behind the throne. It was a ring of Aints Ul Gaun, a magic item that every member of the guild possessed. He wore his on his right ring finger. He could use the powers of 10 rings, but he'd had to choose which ones when he used the item that allowed him to equip that many. It was impossible to swap after the fact. Compared to his other rings, including the one he wasn't wearing, stored in the treasury, this one's power was pretty basic. But he wanted it at the ready, since, in certain circumstances, he used it far more than any of the others. The ring of Aints Ul Gaun let its wearer teleport freely to almost any named room within the Great Tomb of Nazareth. It was even possible to teleport in from outside. The tomb blocked teleportation magic except for in designated areas, so there wasn't a more useful way to get around. There weren't very many places, save the throne room and the members' individual rooms, that couldn't be teleported to. Without this ring, however, there was no way to get to the treasury, so he wouldn't want to be without it. Momonga exhaled deeply. He was about to exercise the ring's power, but he wasn't sure what would happen. Would it work as expected? He was anxious but had to know. He unleashed the power and his vision went dark, like he'd blinked. The scenery changed now. He was in a dimly lit passage. The end was blocked by a barred gate. White artificial light came in through the gaps. Success, he murmured, relieved that he'd been able to teleport. He set off walking down the broad, high-ceilinged passage toward the gate. The stone floor caused his footsteps to reverberate loudly. Flickering torchlight sent shadows dancing along the walls. It made it seem like there was more than one of him. As he neared the gate, his nostrils, which should have just been holes leading to nowhere, were invaded by scent. He stopped to breathe in and out. A pungent green odor and the scent of earth. This was the smell of deep forest. Having his nose working again like it had before with albedo, even though it should have been impossible in the game's fantasy world, made Momonga feel even more strongly that this place was now reality. But with no lungs and no respiratory tract, how am I even breathing? He racked his brains. Soon he realized trying to reason the problem out was ridiculous and abandoned the idea. When he got close enough, the gate drew quickly up into the ceiling. It operated like a well-timed automatic door. Passing beneath, Momonga saw the Colosseum. Multiple levels of spectator seating encircled its central arena. It was an oval of 615 by 510 feet and 157 feet high. It was identical to the Colosseum built in Rome during the imperial period. Continual light was cast in various locations. It threw enough white light that he could look around the area and see as if it were high noon. There were too many seats to count. In them sat a great many golems. They looked like clods of dirt with no sign of movement. This place was called the amphitheatrum. The actors were captured raiders. The audience was made up of golems, and in the VIP seating were the members of Aints Ul Gaun. What was on the program? A slaughter, of course. With the exception of the 500 in that huge raid, every intruder, no matter how strong, had met their end here. Momonga walked into the center of the arena, gazing up at the pitch-black night sky. If there hadn't been any light, he probably would have been able to see the stars. Of course, this was the 6th level of the Great Tomb of Nazarick. Being underground, the sky hanging overhead was a false one, but it was made with quite a lot of data, so it changed with the passage of time. There was even an accurately arcing sun that rose and set.